don't know the market really well, then by all means, the front door analysis. Oh, gee, the broker says that property's worth $250. Let me work into the number. But if you've already done it so many times, like we have, you know, oh, gee, if that number said X and Y. So, for example, when units were priced at $50,000 a door, or a piece of land in downtown West Palm Beach, makes no sense. But there's a magic number. I won't tell you what my magic number is. That when pricing was here and the rents were here, then we have the opportunity.
We're always searching, and I think I can probably speak for Mark in this instance. As developers, to a large extent, you're always searching for market inefficiencies. You're looking for plays that maybe no one else quite sees the way that maybe you do, okay? And pricing inefficiencies. You know, you're looking at, you know, you may find a property and it's well below what you would think would be market price. Usually there is a reason, you know, but if the reason is the right reason and you can fix whatever may be wrong with it, it may be the perfect opportunity. You know, in my particular case, you know, I bought probably 12 commercial properties from an estate of someone that had been dead about 20 years, and they were still managing this estate, and finally the manager of the estate said, I'm tired of managing this estate, you want to buy all of our properties? I said, yeah. He said, well, we'll finance them for you. I said, great. I bought them all, you know, with virtually very little money down. And, you know, that was a sweetheart deal that will probably never, ever again happen in my lifetime.
But you still did the analysis to
right.
make sure that the numbers work.
Absolutely. And so, you know, those are the sorts of things that, you know, every situation is different, but for the most part, you're looking for anomalies. You're looking for unusual circumstances that exist out there that not everyone else sees or has, you know, available to them for whatever reasons. Okay?
Seizing opportunity.
Absolutely. Okay, moving forward, let's put this thing down. Yep.
So, when you talk to a lender, do you actually show all these numbers and you sit down and talk to them about this?
You have to, because I mean, you have to present them with a package that is going to give them insight as to how this project is going to make money, that these rents are real. But even with whatever information you give them, they're going to do what they call haircutting it and go through and basically say, this number's a little bit high, this number's a little bit low. And they're going to do their own analysis independent of what information that you're giving them, and based on that, then they will come back to you with, here is what we're willing and able to do, which may be different than another lender literally across the street.
But in that package that you said that you give them, do you give them like the whole design,
absolutely,
the whole thing finished?
For the most part, yes, because your relationship with your lender, for the most part, is sacred in the sense that they have to be privy to all of the financial information. Matter of fact, they will get more information about you and about this project than anyone, in the sense, you know, tax returns and you know, details about your personal financial wealth and details
the project itself.
And the project itself of you know, all the very specific details of whether or not those rent rates that you're putting out there are realistic or not.
So
how is it going to look and everything else?
Yes, yes. For example, whenever we do our deals and we go to our institutional investors, whether they're debt or equity, not only do I provide them detailed market information, we go way beyond this, and we do detailed cash flow pro formas, and we give them the model. We said, play with the model. Make sure you understand our assumptions, because I know they're going to tweak it, they're going to haircut it, as he said. But if you provide that information, you get to a decision more quickly. Even if it's a no, then you don't have to waste your time with it. So it's incumbent upon you to do all the research, because if you don't do it, they will. But you want, once again, as I said, some deals you can manage, some you can control. The more information you give, you control the narrative of the deal too. So the key here, as a developer,
does it happen the other way?
Yes.
That like a lender or a bank, if there is a project and ask developers to bid on this project or something like that?
It doesn't usually end that way.
Well, with local governments, you may have a project that they're wanting to have done within a community, that they will put out a request for proposals and say, we want developers to give us a submission for a particular site, for like redevelopment or for low-income housing or for whatever it might be. So yes, those sort of situations, you know,
They provide the financial and you do the project.
to a certain extent.
That's right. In fact, the project we're doing in South San Francisco, it was originally an RFP, request for proposal, for a joint venture developer, and we won, if you will. And so they looked at us and they said, what are your financials? What's your pro forma? How would you build it? How many units would you build? Would it be a union project? How many affordable units would you put in there? All those questions, and you're giving them all the information, so you've got to work to see if you can make sense. So information is the key. That makes sense. Your question?
Well, you may expand on that or emphasize it, but one of the primary reasons I'm here is to close the language barrier between myself and my lender, and so I can give those guys the information they need, and because it's a sacred relationship, and being able to identify deals is fine, but you know, if you don't have the ability to go get the money you need to do it, it's not going to.
And it's interesting. I mean, there's a whole thing, and I'm sure you talk about it or you want to. You know, the whole idea of a track record. Sometimes, you know, the first deal is the hardest. You know, me personally, I cashed out a couple $100,000 out of my retirement account, you know, 20 years ago to basically be able to start my first set of ventures. And that was how I personally got started. You know, everybody has their own story as to, you know, how they get their first deal and how much of their own money they have to put into it, and, you know, all those sorts of things. You know, everybody's story is different, but the point being is that, you know, after that first deal, if you obviously do well, there's a good chance that at least that track record is enough to help to substantiate the next deal, which may be a little bit less challenging with the lender especially,
right,
till you get to the point of where, and it certainly have happened to myself and plenty of my business partners, the lenders start chasing you. They sort of say, hey, do you have any other projects that you can potentially, you know, come to us and we'll give you money for? You know, we're dying to get some, you know, additional, you know, product on our accounts, because, you know, we know you're going to do a great job, you're going to pay us back, and so it does work that way in some instances, especially with smaller town lenders, you know, chasing after, you know, the $500,000, $2 million, $5 million deals. You know, maybe not as much, you know, on the high end, but in some cases, you know.
Our South San Francisco deal is a $43 million deal, so it's a little different.
Right.
And has lots of
Yeah, but
layers.
part of your presentation, you know, the professionalism of your presentation and the information provided might separate you from your competition.
Win or lose.
When shopping,
I hope so.
that's right.
Okay,
But,
so let's,
question.
yeah.
Do equity firms though for multi-million-dollar deals right now have a standard fixed rate on the cap rate on their mind for lending?
They do by market, because each market is different in terms of what that's going to be, and it evolves and changes, you know, over time, obviously depending on whether they see that market improving or declining for whatever reasons.
And currently in Florida, multifamily?
You probably could answer that. I mean, the cap rate for multifamily
Cap rate
and
from an equity firm for,
So right now, the hot market type has been multifamily, because you've all read this week a number of different stories. And so cap rates are really low, and the problem is, in fact, I had a discussion, just by way of example, yesterday with a life insurance company. I presented my deal. We have a couple of different deals. And I heard what I haven't heard in about 5 or 6 years.
uh-oh.
What do you think I heard, folks? Just guess.
Rates are going up.
Well, a little bit differently, actually. It's just that, oh gosh, the market's too
Changed.
hot.
Yep.
It's overheated.
Yep.
We're concerned, and I'm thinking, really? But, and remember, developers are optimists by nature, right? But they were concerned, and they said, well, you know, you look at the total number of projects in the pipeline, you look at the inventory, you look at the rate of increase and this and that and so on and everything else. And of course, this particular insurer, who shall go nameless, was quoting general statistics which had nothing to do with the sub-market that I was talking about. Because remember, real estate is local, 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 local. And so it was just so interesting to hear them say this, because if they had said it in 2008 or 2009, maybe I would have bought it. And by the way, so they rejected the deal. They said, oh, we love the property, but we're not comfortable with the market. Well, then you don't love the property, because the properties I bring you make sense in the market. I wouldn't waste my time with them. Also, it made me think that they hadn't done their homework, but that's a different story. So yes, so look, multifamily, cap rates are low, and yes, the real issue is you want to go in at one cap rate and sell at, you want to sell at a higher or lower cap rate, folks?
Lower.
Lower, that's right. And so now, everybody's so interested, what's the Fed going to do with the interest rates? How's that going to affect my investment rates, right? And so, when it kills.
Yeah, and it's a tricky game. I mean, I think, personally, one of the best pieces of advice I got, sort of anecdotally, from a developer back in the mid-90s, who was very successful in the 80s, got out just in time, cashed out, and had a big wad of cash before the crash of the 1980s happened. And I remember him, the piece of advice that he gave me was, he said, I knew it was time to get out of the development game whenever I was on the golf course and my caddy was talking about how much money he had just made on basically flipping houses. And the whole mindset was that if everybody is making money, it's too easy. There's some sort of critical point, jumping the shark, whatever language you want to sort of use to sort of, that when a market gets really overheated, everybody has this mindset of the go, 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 but you don't sometimes step back and really look at the reality, which may not be as glamorous, which is it probably is overpriced, and that we need to really come back to the fundamentals. Does it make economic sense? And that's where what Juan had said earlier about these sort of outrageous prices and the lack of consistency with the rates of return. It's because, once again, the market gets overheated. Now, the people who are overheating the market, for the most part, are the individual sort of players, the smaller, sort of investors, not as much, to a certain extent, as the more sophisticated, kind of institutional grade players and beyond. Those folks are really sharp and are really tuned into what's going on and are paying attention. Not to say they're not going to make mistakes, but there's going to be probably a lot more attention paid to the market fundamentals. Okay, now, I asked you guys if you could, to download this. If you don't have it downloaded, you can't bring it up on your computer, it's not a problem, you can do it at home. But we've already worked through the math. All I want to do now is to sort of show you kind of the impact that some of these, changing some of these variables would actually have on the bottom line. Okay, so this is the same example that is obviously the one that we worked through that's on your sheet. So what if we go through and we do make a change, and this is to see what would happen. So we change the interest rate from 7.5% to, let's say, 5%. All we did was change the interest rate from 7.5% to 5%. So now what that's telling us is, instead of having to get $15 a square foot in rental income, we only have to get $13.61 in order for this property to be feasible. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That's just changing one of about 10 different variables there that obviously we can change. So let's change another one. Change the loan term. So instead of having a 15-year mortgage, let's say that we have a 20 or 30-year mortgage. We'll go with 30. Wow. Drops it even more to only $11 per square foot is what we would have to get as a rental rate. Now, is it realistic for us to potentially get a 30-year mortgage on multifamily residential? Some programs, especially through HUD, it probably is. Others, not so much. I mean, Mark, what do you think the prevailing would be?
I actually think somewhere between, if you're lucky, you can get up to 20 years on a market rate deal.
HUD has some specialized programs that allow you to get up to like 30 years, but those are about the only ones I'm aware of that get you beyond probably that 15 to 20 year sort of term.
They would actually government subsidized.
Right.
Well, that's a different issue, Claudius, and so, for example, we go back to my Seattle project, not Seattle, San Francisco project. We have 20% of our units are affordable, which means we're able to get a different interest rate, which means we're able to get a subsidy, and so all that relates back to what do we need in terms of rent, or how do we adjust our costs. But I would suggest to you that every time that we go in for a deal, we're very conservative on the financing, because I don't want to go in thinking, oh, all I need is $11 a square foot, when the market really is, if it moves $1 or $2, you're toast.
Right. Yeah, and so as an example, once again, we can kind of go in and change up some of these other little scenarios. What happens if we're saying the occupancy rate should be 90%, but the reality is maybe it's 75%. Now, all of a sudden, that starts moving up our required rental income. You sort of see what I'm saying? It's just that the interplay of all of those different variables, it's much easier to do with a spreadsheet than obviously trying to do it all by hand on the board. But to be able to perform effectively a sensitivity analysis of sort of saying, what if I raise this? What if I lower this? And what is going to be the resulting impact? Okay, everybody comfortable with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you can do all of that on your own and play with that as much as you want to effectively see, how those sorts of things are going to translate. Yeah.
So sometimes you see properties or developing projects or whatever that use cheaper materials.
Yep.
So who is responsible of these things, bad things like Chinese drywall, or who's responsible? The banks for not lending the money, the developers to develop money?
You could effectively, hold the construction company responsible if they're the ones that make the choice on the building materials, that they're of substandard quality in some way. But that's a little bit of a different subject for the purposes of what we're trying to discuss right now. Okay. Now, all right. So everybody reasonably comfortable with what we've got here? Yep.
The debt service coverage ratio. Did you also call that the return on total development costs? Essentially the same thing?
No.
No. It's the debt service coverage ratio is just simply a ratio that the lender is going to set and simply say, we need you to have your income to be a certain percentage higher than what the or we need to have your income be a certain percentage higher than what your actual costs are in terms of the debt.
So are we able to do this? So you brought up an interesting concept, return on cost. So here we're focused on what are the rents or what's the acquisition and the deal. Maybe we could turn this analysis around just a little bit, and we can look at these numbers if I may take the initiative here. So we always want to know, as investors, what our return is in the deal. And there's nothing here about our return.
Not at all.
Right. But let's just see, you can derive your return from this kind of analysis. And return on cost, essentially, we'll keep it simple, is, well, let's see, we've got the net operating income, and then we have the debt service. And after the debt service is subtracted from the net operating income, we have another series of letters. Basically, it's NCF, net cash flow. That's the flow, forget about reserves and all those other things for the moment, that comes to you as either the owner or to your investors. So let's just look. We have, let's just look. So we've got NOI, required net operating income. Where's our NOI now?
Right there,
Back
line
up.
11, right about that.
Yeah, we should probably go back up. Okay. All right, so we've got about $50,000 in NOI here. And we know that the cash required for debt service is about 41. So let's round the numbers to make our life easy. $10,000 a month is flowing to you as the investor or the owner after all those other items. So if we can just take that, so 50 minus the 40, give or take, or so. And then what we're going to look at, so that's the return. But now, of course, Steve, you were mentioning, what's your return on your cost? So what's your investment rate? So we're going to now do what he's doing on the board, saying, well, gee, what was my cost out of the deal? So the total cost was $795, and then he subtracted the $636 $1,752, which will tell us the amount of equity or cash out of pocket that we as developers would have to invest. Up comes the number of 150 some and change. See, you should do all this stuff in your head. You don't need to calculate, right? And see, I'm just rounding numbers, if you will. So, so we've got about 159 or 160, if you will. Okay, but now, and so our net operating income, if you really want to take the numbers, 49,222 minus 41,0815. Oh, well, remember, we want to do the return. So what's our net cash flow? 49,222 minus the 41,018, which is, you know, $8,204, something to that effect. You can do all this math on your own, right? He's going to check it. But see, I said it with such confidence you didn't have any doubt, right? You can have wrong, right? All right, so it's close, off by 25 cents. All right. So now, what's our return? So it's really looking at before tax cash flow, net cash flow. We haven't talked about taxes. And we're going to divide it by the equity or investment, and we'll get another return rate, if you will, and that will be, I didn't want to hazard a guess on this one. Okay, 5% or so can change.
And see, I would refer to this as the before tax return on equity, but it's also called effectively cash on cash.
Yes, cash on cash, return on cash. Remember, we're just doing what we call a static snapshot pro forma. We're not looking at returns over time. We're just simply saying, what is it as of the date of either stabilization or some other point in the deal. So to answer your question, it's interesting. So this kind of deal is 5%. Gee, does that make sense in today's market? Depends on who you're investing with and what your investors want. Yes?
What about the principal value that you're paying down when you tear that back?
That's a great point. That's and over time, if you're looking at a pro forma, of course, you're building equity as you pay back the loan.
Unless you have an interest-only mortgage.
Unless it's interest-only, and I love interest-only as a developer, actually. Yeah, you had a question, Jeff?
Well, I just want to add, of course, the disadvantage of this outlook as you move along into the project is it's really not going to give you the information to make decisions as you progress into the project, because costs are going to change, interest rates are going to change, so it's static and it's limited.
That's why it is merely what I would call a culling device.
This is the first cut. That was the study phase. You're driving by, you're doing the desktop, you're out there in the field.
Drive-by.
This helps you understand whether it's worth going to the next phase.
This is basically how sexy is the deal. You know, from a quick look, you know, how does it rate? You know, and that's really what this is meant to do. This is not the detailed analysis. This is the first glance that you give the deal. This is what
takes a lot of subjectivity out of it.
Right.
You know, you're not choosing a discount rate.
Right, and don't get fooled because the numbers are exact. That it's, you know, more real.
This is what you get Barnes and Noble.
What?
Pardon?
In the real estate section, the Barnes and Noble, you know, real estate books.
This is the basics.
Yeah, that's what you get out of this.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
ready to
the
go.
part that we're obviously going to be getting into, not so much in this course, but like in the finance course, the investment course, is where we delve into the weeds, okay? We delve into all the issues surrounding after-tax cash flow, you know, coming up with differences between, you know, how you treat repairs and maintenance versus capital expenditures, you know, all of those, you know, kinds of other issues, but also, you know, fundamentally, how do you go about manipulating some of this information to your advantage? And ultimately, what kind of things do lenders, what barriers or what other things may they impose upon you? You know, do they charge you prepayment penalties if you pay off the loan early? Do they charge you loan origination fees to actually make the loan? Do they charge you ongoing sort of costs throughout the loan that are above and beyond the actual interest rate? You know, many other additional layers of complexity beyond this fundamental sort of analysis. Yep.
And it's a deal for the developer, just like the lender, who may require you to have a 20% margin oh, what can we recover that? They might say, based on inflation, the risk, what I have to pay to borrow money. I need to have at least 20 or 15 before I look at it or do it.
Yep.
So, you know, folks, this is a development deal. So just by rule of thumb, you're making 5%. Does that sound like it's worth the risk?
No.
In today's market, it isn't. In fact, when you hear that developers are looking for returns in the mid-teens, the riskier it gets into the upper 20% range, then, you know, you've got some real room here. This deal is too tight for my liking right now, but once again, we're just giving you the example. If it was an existing building that was buying, I'd say maybe it works. But you're gonna have to put a shovel on the ground and take all the construction risk, probably not.
So what would have been to your liking?
Pardon?
What number would have been to your liking as a return?
Oh, no, the numbers all work, it's just that for my personal,
Your personal.
professional, 5% is way too low to engage in this kind of round
So
up.
would double digit get your attention better?
Maybe.
Well, I can't speak for Mark personally. I would say, you know, most folks that are going to be looking at a return on equity, they're going to be looking probably north of 15 to 25% on their equity.
Well, you also got to look at what you're going to compete with putting in the stock market, right? Like the opportunity cost of putting it into some other investment opportunity. Why would you put it in real estate at 5%? It's like almost.
Well, you might, especially since you can get, what, 0.0001% on your money market.
Right.
And stocks are going down. So it all is related to the context, once again, of the environment. And why does changing in the stock markets like this past week have an impact on the investment? Carol?
Yeah, and there are like 4 different type of returns you might consider. Because, for example, where I'm from in Georgia, there's a new stadium being moved to Marietta. When you look at the papers, what's happening in terms of them buying up and the value, you're looking at the assessor changing things, there's significant room for appreciation. So normally you go for cash flow. That's what keep the projects going. But there's some projects you do that may have a 7-year turnaround in terms of what the appreciation is going to be. But the cash flow has to work, otherwise the project won't stay alive.
And so, once again, we have lots of different concepts here, and hopefully we're not taking you too far afield. She brings up a great point, and that is the timeline for your investment is important. And so you might say, you know, this deal is 6 months or 1 year, I'm in and out, I'll take the 5%. 7 years, maybe I won't because the risk and the time is too far.
Okay, a couple final things, and I'll kind of wrap up this piece. One of the things that you are going to be faced with that is probably not inherently included in a lot of the market reports are the actual construction costs, okay, for property, different property types. RS means is probably one of the most, I guess, used sort of sources of being, and Marshall Swift is another, that will give you cost estimates for construction costs by market. Now what they do is they effectively survey contractors and developers from across the country and find out how much are they spending on a per square foot basis on different types of properties by, you know, region. And, you know, things are going to differ, whether it's like in the north where you have more labor unions, whereas, you know, obviously in the south there's less of a prevalence of labor unions. So the cost is going to be different there, you know, on the construction side. But this particular site, RS means, you can pretty much just Google RS means like quick cost calculator or something like that. This will pop up, and what it does is it gives you a pretty wide variety of property types, okay? I mean, literally, you've got all different sorts of property types. You click on one of those, so let's just click on apartment 1 to 3 story, all right? So they have a national average here for the year 2013 of about, with open shop, or in other words, non-union labor, of about 141 bucks a square foot. Now granted, that is nationwide. We probably want something a little bit more specific to South Florida. So what we can do is we can go up here and do a model by state and click on this index. And we go down to Florida, Fort Lauderdale, all right? Now, it should give us a revised number, not that different, okay? Still about $124 a square foot, all right, for that particular property type. Now, this does not include land, okay? This is purely the construction cost with estimated contractor fees and architectural fees. Now, and we can argue all day and night as to how accurate this is. This is meant to be effectively an average for the market. If you have a premium product that you are bringing to the market, your construction costs are going to be higher than that. If you are bringing a product that is not so premium, kind of a lower tier product, your construction cost might be lower than that. But this is pretty much an average, but at least it gives you a baseline, okay? Does that make sense? Now, what I do is we'll at least sort of take that piece of information of around $124.15 and pop that back into our model here, leaving the site acquisition cost blank. And what I'm doing here is what I talked about earlier. I'm looking at this on a per square foot basis, using the model on a per square foot. So what we're doing is, under leasable square foot, I'm just putting a 1. And we're saying it only has 1 square foot, therefore we're looking at it on a per square foot basis. So just on the construction cost, with all of these assumptions of a loan to value of 80%, interest rate of 5% for 20 years, 1.2 debt service coverage, $3 of operating cost per square foot being passed along to the, or not passed to the tenants that the property owners having to pay, 95% occupancy rate. What that means is that property would have to get $13.09 per square foot per year in order to be successful, at a minimum. That's without even looking at land cost. So let's just take that number for a second. At $13.09, and given that this is multifamily residential, $13.09, that is annual. So when we divide that by 12, that gives us $1 and roughly 9 cents per square foot per month. So if you had an apartment, let's say a 1-bedroom apartment, just hypothetically, and that 1-bedroom apartment is 800 square feet in size, then that means you should be getting about $872.67 in rent per month. Does that make sense? Now that is assuming the land is free. Okay, do I follow me on that?
Yes.
Okay, so we obviously know the land is not free. So let's say that we pop in, I don't know, $25 a square foot for land. What do you think, Mark? Any idea?
I
know we can go.
In Manhattan, that would be a steal.
Oh, of course, but here.
So actually, I think that it's low.
It's probably still a little bit low. Okay, let's put 35, just what the heck. Okay, so $35. If we put that in per square foot for the land of for this particular property, and keep in mind this is not a high-rise, it's more of a garden style sort of apartment. It's going to be probably out in a more suburban kind of location. But assuming that that is the case, what does that then mean? Now we've gone up to $15.89, which divided by 12 is $1.32 a square foot times an 800 square foot apartment. That base rent would now be $1,059.33. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Okay, so the difference between these two is this obviously includes the price of the land. This is just simply the construction cost only. But at least it gives you, some sort of a ballpark idea of, if you kind of sort of know, most people are going to be paying within the same region for construction cost. I mean, granted, there are always variations, that you may be able to achieve, but that's one variable that you might have a little bit more control over. But hopefully, that kind of begins to kind of make sense in your mind of how you can begin to kind of utilize this sort of model, and being able to look at it on a per square foot basis can be really useful from the standpoint of being able to kind of come up with what that rental rate would need to be. Okay? Questions? Thoughts? Observations?
So that website, MS Means, is it only based for new construction, or could it be for like redevelopment?
It is really meant for new construction.
Okay.
The redevelopment, it's impossible, because with redevelopment, it depends on how far you have to go. With redevelopment, you may be doing on one extreme, you may be doing nothing more than repainting, recarpeting, putting in some new light fixtures, and call it a day. On the other end of the extreme, you're literally going through, tearing out every possible conceivable thing within that space, literally starting from an empty shell. So, that's what makes it almost impossible to be able to give a, but what you could do is you could kind of, begin to, sort of, based upon the level of construction, you might just sort of say, well, my finish out or my renovation cost might only be 10, 15, 20 bucks a square foot.
Do you have to subscribe to the website?
For that basic information, absolutely not. For more detailed information, absolutely yes. Okay? So they give you that nice little taste, which will, for our purposes, or at least my purposes, I can't speak for Mark, but for my purposes, I just want you in the ballpark, on the construction cost. If you're telling me that the multifamily product in South Florida, you're giving me a construction cost of $3,000 a square foot, no, not unless it's in downtown Miami and there's some other weird nonsense going on. Okay? Okay, yep.
I went to a class at the association like 2 days ago, realtors, and the teacher was saying the difference is some people call themselves investors and they're speculators. Oh yes, I'm going to buy a property and flip it, and that's an investor, that's not an investor. He was saying that's a speculator. There is a big difference between somebody who thinks like this to somebody who just buying, putting money out of the market. And
there's no question there's a lot of crazy money that will chase after, unsustainable, deals. And the downtown condo market in Miami is definitely one of those that is just, it's absurd. Because it's not inherently local market driven. Obviously, it's driven by overseas, or Latin American investors, wherever, that are coming in and simply saying, this is what I want, and are willing to pay almost any price for it. It's a whole different mindset. Okay, other questions, thoughts, observations? Yep.
This is dealing with other income. If you own the building, can you lease the airspace?
Sure. There's a lot of things you can do to generate other income, but it's just a question of how you treat it for the purposes of looking at it as an investment. That, like, whenever the property may get valued, that other income may just simply be sort of discounted or not really a whole lot of attention paid to it. Okay. Depending on what it is. There are weird things that could be even mineral rights for that matter. Could go with a property, and if the oil markets are high, or gas market, or the natural gas markets are high, that could be a lot of extra income. Okay. Other things. Okay, I think that about does it for me, unless you guys have got anything else.
No, I think we've got enough from what you've got. I'd like to actually just take a 5-minute break, brief break, just freshen yourself up, and then we'll start back on the rest of our multifamily discussion. Okay.
And if you borrowed one of my calculators, go ahead and give that back to me. Oh shoot, I should have this one. Yeah, so well, on the calculator you don't actually have to calculate.
This product, I've used it.
That's why I said, hey, I like being in front of.
When we come out from break,
Manage it. There's no idea what stabilization is. On to the next exciting adventure.
I just did a quick, less than an hour.
absolutely.
It's,
Punch it all in.
Sure. Obviously, it's under construction.
Yes.
There is the, I say, base it on value.
You don't get that much.
That's right, another discussion.
So here's the problem. So he said, translate different, so
What do you guys do drive for the 94? Oh, you guys all go home after this? Yeah.
and now you're just going
So you guys go last night?
But again,
I was confused about the second call. You got like call A and call B. Call B, there's what, they're taking classes. So yeah, there were 4 classes. You take 2 online classes. There's no rental rate class until next year. Yes, I was thinking about that.
You're going to be using the whiteboard goal?
that's what I did.
This one.
Because that
Yeah, I know we need
So then you wouldn't go through like more
We did our matches together, and then she took some of our work. We're trying to
Yeah, or there was one right before. That's what
You're gonna get it eventually. So one of the things that they say is that I don't change it.
Okay, is everybody back? Got one final quick thing and I'm out of here. Okay, come on, okay, the final thing I need to mention before I leave, I told you I was going to talk about the mortgage constant, which is one of the things on the sheet. Let me explain that real quickly. That's the final piece to the puzzle. It's not really absolutely necessary that you use it, because when you use the financial calculator, you really don't have to go through this. But let me just sort of explain what it is and kind of how it gets used in this spreadsheet model. All right. So if you were to want to calculate this annual mortgage constant that's there in the spreadsheet, you would start out 12 payments per year on the calculator, put in your interest rate, put in your term, but then put in $1 as the loan amount or the present value. You solve, and that's going to give you your monthly mortgage constant of this amount. You multiply that by 12, that's going to give you your annual mortgage constant, which is the number that you will find there on the sheet under the mortgage constant. Now, what you've got to be also sort of saying, what is this number? Why is this number there? What does it mean? Okay, real quickly. The notion of a mortgage constant goes back many decades, and decades prior to us using financial calculators, prior to us having effectively computers to do computations. Whenever, I mean, I remember, even myself, I was kind of at the beginning of a lot of the financial calculators, and what we had in a lot of our real estate textbooks were tables. And those present value tables, future value tables, payment tables, that sort of thing. Well, this number, this mortgage constant, is effectively out of like a payment table. In other words, it's telling you specifically that you can take this number as it's been calculated, and if you want to find out what the monthly mortgage payment would be for any loan amount, you can simply multiply it by this amount. So in other words, if you had a $100,000 mortgage, you multiply it by this, what it's going to tell you is you're going to have effectively a mortgage payment of about $927 a month as your mortgage payment with a $100,000 mortgage. Okay? Whereas on an annual basis, it would be like obviously $11,124. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, you're saying, well, why is it on there? As I said, it's simply kind of an anachronistic sort of thing, but it actually allows you, though, to see the math. If you actually look, what you can do is, if you look over on the left, it allows you, if you have that mortgage constant, you can simply take your permanent mortgage of the $636,000, multiply it by that mortgage constant, and then that gives you the actual annualized mortgage payment. Does that make sense?
Wait, are you saying that so it's like this is the same chart as the loan mortgage oriented
Yeah.
thing? Oh.
Yeah, it's basically, it's one of those sorts of things that you can just simply look up and see what the payment would be. Because if you think historically, and before obviously we had traditional calculators and that sort of thing, we did all these calculations by hand. And so effectively, at least having this printed out for a, actually, I already erased it, but on the, if you click on the spreadsheet that I gave you for this, on the bottom, there is a page 1. Now, page 1 actually has a whole table of mortgage constant values for differing interest rates and differing terms. Okay? But the reason why it's called a constant is because it stays the same if the interest rate is the same and the term is the same. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So That's it for me, and that's got everything. We'll get out of here and let Mark finish up the day.
So, class, what we're going to focus on now for the rest of the afternoon is a deeper dive into multifamily development. And I'm going to present a case study. Before I present the case study, I want to tell us how we got to that case study. You're going to see that we use REES as an important part of this case study. So let's dive into it. And as I mentioned, what we're telling you today really is in that developer's process, all about the numbers and the market analysis. And so we're going to say, when we look at any deal, we want to identify the market areas. Now you remember with REES, they looked at the city, the MSA, the market, the submarkets, and we'll get to there too as well. But identifying the market area is your first cut, frankly, of looking at any of these kinds of elements. And from there, you can analyze the demand. Now most of the information that was in REES was supply, right? Remember, we had a little bit of the demographics, but it's primarily a supply side equation, if you will. And so identifying that supply is critical. And when you are looking to build or develop, then you want to see what your competition is. We're going to go through that specifically on this case study that we're working on as well. And from there, we'll also be able to figure out something which is very important. Capture, penetration, and absorption rates. So when we talk about markets and market analysis, these particular terms are different than if we were referring to a financial analysis. The market analysis essentially says, on a capture rate, what can your property or project capture within that market? So for example, if there are, in this morning's example, if there were 30 properties and each one had 100 units of housing, let's make it really easy, that's 3,000 units of housing, and you were to build another 100 units, what's the impact on the overall capture? Your capture of the marketplace is really small. 100 out of 3,000, you're effectively less than 3%, right? And so the key here is to figure out, is the capture rate viable? Does it make sense? And we'll talk about whether it does make sense. In some markets, if you are the only property that's in that marketplace, it may not matter if you have a 100% capture rate because you have no competition. But in other markets, if you are one of many and you are inferior, you don't have the right location, you don't have the right rents, you don't have the right free rent, then your capture rate better be very low because you don't want to risk the ability of not being able to capture a given individual. So when we talk about market penetration and absorption rates, there's the flip side of what's happening in a capture rate analysis. We also look at housing market trends. Every market is going to be different about what is built and what is actually rented and what that is. So there's what we come into, I call a comparable property analysis. And everybody talks about comps, that's our shorthand for the listing. We're going to go through that as well. And then finally, we'll figure out the other side of the equation. And if we can match supply and demand together, then we know we have the ability to understand what's going on, and you can make a recommendation to whomever it is that you're doing the job for, or you can just tell it to yourself as an investor as well. So let's talk about identifying the market. When we talk about markets, how do we even begin to define them? We define them basically by saying where the residents live. Remember, we're talking about multifamily, residential, rental apartments. That's a big sector of the marketplace. In fact, let's just do a little bit of Q&A. So, how many new housing units are built in the U.S. every year? Any guesses? You have a guess? No? Well, how many?
6 million.
Half a million. Any other guesses?
6 million.
6 million, okay, all right, so Nick is conservative, and Paul obviously is out on the limb. And so what this, it's important to understand context, right? And so if you're reading the paper, and we've got a lot today, and I don't know if we'll get to our news and everything, but there's always news about what's going on with sales and construction. So in fact, in the United States, simply put, about 1 million new units of housing are built right now, every year. Of those, more than half are multifamily. So let's just do a little math. So let's say 500,000 or 600,000 units. So by the way, so we're going to talk about multifamily, but let's divert ourselves a little bit. That means about 500,000 new houses in the United States are built every year. How many homes are sold every year in the United States? So new homes, maybe about 500,000. It's kind of trailing. How many existing homes are sold every year? Well, I'm going to ask you to figure that out, and we'll talk about it next week. Because it doesn't matter if, it's good to know I have 500,000 new homes, but existing homes are important too, right? And you've got to figure out what the relationship is between them. So now, that's just a little quiz, and you'll come up with the answer next week. So the question is, well, and I'm doing my multifamily research, where do the people who are going to live in the building or the property, where do they live? What's their radius? And so here, we don't know what the distance is, but my rule of thumb is 60 to 80%. So if we're living in Florida and everything's flat and there's never a traffic jam, how far can you go within that market area? You could probably drive 5, 6, 7 miles out and figure out the market area. If you're in New York, or if you're in a city like the city we're going to talk about, Pittsburgh, which is very hilly. Anybody been to Pittsburgh? Okay, very hilly city. And so you go over to the next hill, like you're not in the same market area. So there the market areas begin to shrink. So remember, it's not absolute size, it's physical, geographical, and man-made boundaries as well. But key is, where are the current individuals in that marketplace? Now, there are exceptions, of course. Here in South Florida, we've got so much in rapidly growing development, certainly west of 95 and west of the Turnpike. You may say, we don't know how many people live there, but we can project what's going on. Or, if you're working in a downtown area, infill, that changes the nature. If you've got a piece of land and it's already built up, maybe it doesn't matter there either. Second home communities, how do you even measure that? In fact, I have yet to figure out the way to do that. Overall, my 30 years of business, I've worked on a number of second home projects, and you say, wait, how do I determine demand? Especially for here, how do developers, and there's a way, but a lot of hard work. So if my target market is New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., how do you measure that market? Well, it's kind of hard to say I've got that entire market. And so what way do you think would be the best way to measure? If you don't have the people in your market, and you want to bring them to your market in a second home community, and you've targeted the cities, let's assume that you know where they're going to be coming from. What's the best way to figure out how to define that market? What criteria would you use? Pardon? Income, yeah. Sure, because especially what second homes usually, look, it's the second home. You have to have enough income to be able to afford the first home, not just the second. And so that means a wealthier cohort, if you will, and once you've figured out with your back of the envelope how much you can sell it for, then you can go back and say, gee, if I've got an income of X and I'm already in a certain home, then maybe I can support a second home. And so all of a sudden, that's the way we begin to do it. So it's not a traditional way to do it. Senior citizens, that's also another issue about how do you measure that. Their disposable incomes are high often, but their ability to earn income is low. So it depends on what it is. Market areas also are often not contiguous. So a possible opportunity for a market may be, let's put it this way, so downtown Fort Lauderdale, there are a number of new buildings going up, and Stiles Corporation, the instant question to ask them in 2 weeks, who's your target market for the 8th Avenue residences? And I'm gonna guess that it's not just simply a radius around downtown, but they're looking to, the nature of their deal is probably more affluent, they're gonna look to where those more affluent markets reside. So then you can do an income analysis, not just simply a household or a head count.
I think that was a rental building actually. I think it was, Chad and I went there for the first day of our class last semester, and that was a
All right,
rental
so you
building.
two will just pretend that you haven't been there.
I kind of also worked for Charles through the summer.
And you have to see if John Auerbach.
Well, no,
is
because when we
really
went
saying
there,
right.
it wasn't even finished, and I went to the top golf ceremony when I was working for Styles. So it should be cool to see.
It will be very interesting for you, and of course, one reason, as I said, they had to close up the building, and even though it's now just a lot of rain, it's probably better that they did that instead. So, once again, different criteria that are used for looking at the market can also be based upon not just simply households, not only simply income, but employment nodes, transportation corridors. Have you ever looked at a drive time map? I don't have one right now, but so for example, the drive time to get to, I guess, this campus is probably the same, excuse me, let me rephrase that. The drive time is the same for a much longer distance north-south than east-west. Does that make sense, folks?
Yes. Yeah.
So if I'm coming down the turnpike, north or south, I've got the high speed, but 575 or one of the local roads, much slower. So all of a sudden, your drive time might look like this, expands this way, not this way, and all of a sudden that changes your market area in your definition. So transportation is important, neighborhoods, natural amenities as well, golf courses, rivers. Of course, there is a really distinct coastal market here, where the intercoastal, anything east of that is a world unto its own in all sorts of ways, shape, and form. And that's another way to define markets. You can also look at not just the physical barriers, but municipal barriers. Now, in Florida, we really don't have that school barrier, if you will, because the entire county is the school district. And I guess if you don't like the school district, you send your kids to private school. But up north and out west, the municipalities and the school districts are usually one and the same. And so if anybody here been from or New York, or familiar with New York City, okay, so if you were living in Westchester County, to the north, Scarsdale is a great school district, and the price of the housing is more than double what it is next door in a town like Eastchester or Greenburgh, simply because of the school district. And so, just because South Florida is an anomaly here, don't forget, municipal and school boundaries are really important as well. So I mentioned travel time. I do say socioeconomic status, political subdivisions. It's really interesting. Markets are segregating along political lines. And yes, everybody talks about red states and blue states. In every state, there's a red and a blue cohort somewhere. But even within those states, they've changed. And so sometimes the types of projects and the demographics of what you're looking at can also cross against those political lines as well, which is interesting, and I'm not sure that's a good thing, but it's certainly something that is a reality. And then, where do we have the information? Where you're data rich, you can do a lot more. Where you don't, then, of course, you manage it, and hopefully make a very good guess as well. So the same issue on physical barriers as well. So, I focused on what I call the marketability aspect of this. We're going to analyze the property clearly. That's something which we always do. We'll have an economic and demographic analysis. You put a market analysis, and those lead you to a concept and development program. And so this is what led us to a program for this particular deal that you're going to see in just a minute. But to make those analyses, if you will, have you heard of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis? Basically a SWOT analysis. And so you're going to look at all the different lines of what makes sense. So you take your market data, this is just a good template, and then you say, okay, let me ask the questions of my physical and my site configuration. We're going to look at that in this particular case study. We're going to look at the plans that are in place. Of course, does that make sense? Because it may be, for example, when a municipality says, here, we've got this site, and this is the plan, it may not work even if the market's right. And so that's an important consideration. I mentioned the economic and the demographic. Proximity to other features and amenities. That's really important. I think, talking about, when I talk about proximity as well as adjacency, has anybody heard of a walk score? Who here knows what a walk score is? All right, 2 or 3 of you. We'll have a presentation on that in the next class too. I don't think we'll have time to get to it here. But even your ability to walk easily to the store and other amenities affects value. And it's going to be interesting to see how that has an impact as well. Compatibility of adjacent uses. Zoning is important. You want to live next door to an incinerator, or actually in the news in West Palm Beach about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there are all over the state and other places, there are crematoriums. You know, people pass away and they would rather be cremated instead of having their remains buried. And one wasn't using the oven very well, let's put it that way. And so the noxious fumes and other things like that can have a real impact. That's a really extreme example about an industrial use adjacent to a residential use. Neighborhood image. I think these are pretty straightforward, but some neighborhoods have a better image than others. Liberty City doesn't have a good image in Miami, though it's getting better, right? Some areas of the counties and of South Florida, if you look at, I guess some people called it the Pale of Settlement. It's a bad joke, perhaps, but basically from the Intracoastal, from Route 1 to 95, kind of the forgotten strip along the way our entire MSA, our Metropolitan Statistical Area, works. And so, how do you overcome those kinds of things as well? And then, frankly, delivery of public and private services. I live in Palm Beach Gardens. They do a great job. I'm not sure not Jupiter, Riviera Beach does the same. So just being next door to another community can have a huge impact as well. And finally, access and transportation. So everybody got here today by what form of transportation?
Car.
Did anyone, who walked? From where?
I live like, no, not on campus, but like where where is it? Where
Across the street.
Okay, all right, so, you know, kudos
I'm
to
new
you.
here, I don't know the area.
Good, he's getting good exercise, that's wonderful. But in fact, once again, back to that issue of walkability and accessibility, and nowadays, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about urban development, and if you can take the bus, the train, the subway, well, we don't have subways really here.
Yeah, the mover.
But any of those things, you have the Metro movers, of course, you've got Tri-Rail, and soon, all aboard Florida, which I think is going to have a really big impact on what's going on in urban communities, and that's going to change the value and pricing. Visibility. What if someone can see your development? So I came down the Florida Turnpike this morning, and I always go up and down the Turnpike because I much prefer to the I-95. I don't know, something about driving in a 2 or 3 lane road instead of a 6 or 7 lane road just feels a lot better, and the speed's faster too. So I pay that premium, if you will. But visibility, so right there, have you noticed, you know, there's 7 bridges, there's Lions, there's Tuscany. I mean, these properties immediately visible, right against the highway, and that has something to say for in your ability to absorb and sell out a deal. If it's hidden and you can't see it, I don't know. Of course, if you're high-rise, that helps. We'll find out about that too. So all these are important factors, and then finally we get to economic and demographic analysis. So look at population trends and projections. We haven't even dealt with that issue right now. But just because you have a population, it may not be the right population. So if you're building in a senior citizen complex, you need to know where the over 55 sit. All right, anybody here over 55? I am, that's okay. So employment and income trends, industry groups, employment groups. So in fact, people are categorized and classified by their form of employment too. And you can do really good studies that show you can predict their propensity to buy, rent, live, or work based upon their income and their employment. And then, I'm sorry, yes?
Well, these days also the amount of foreclosures and short sales in the neighborhood, you know.
So that's a community factor, if you will, and so perception. And there's no question, if you have a community which has a high number of those kinds of transactions, it's going to make it difficult to introduce a new for sale product in that area. But that may represent another opportunity for someone to buy up those properties or to negotiate with the bank. And in fact, that's what's happened. There are companies like BlackRock and Equity One who have purchased tens of thousands of single-family homes and turned them into a rental business. Now, nobody's yet determined whether the scale of that can work because every house is different. But in fact, there was a sale just actually 3 months ago in Palm Beach County of over 1,100 homes for something in the order of $200+ million. Being operated as rental property. So it does make a difference, of course. And then finally, back to the current local and national economy. So I'm going into detail about this because all about the numbers. It's not about what we have right now. It's about the history and about what has happened in the trend in the past. Because while you can't necessarily predict, you can simply at least see what happened during different periods of the economy. So when you look at the numbers that you're going to download from REES for your properties or any of the studies that we're looking at, you're actually going to see, you'll measure it. It'll be easy to see where the numbers go when it comes to a recession or a boom period, if you will. And then finally, we're going to estimate potential lease-up on capture rates and absorption. So I'm going to scoot a little bit more quickly through this because it's rather detailed. Housing market analysis is not only about the macro, it's about the specific. So a lot of these items are in the REES data. But I would caution you, I'd never do an analysis without actually visiting the property, unless it's just a desktop deal. And that's part of your feasibility phase, for example, not just your study. But you really want to go and shop the property. Anybody ever shop a property? I don't mean just for yourself, but it's interesting. When you do it, you have to be the right demographic, for example. And there was I was working for a number of years in New York with a firm called the Weitzman Group, and we had a particular deal actually in Washington, D.C. And the target market was not me. So I had one of our younger associates. I pretended to be her dad, and yeah, I mean, you laugh, but it looked right. That here we were looking, she was going off to school, she was a little bit older than that, but she could pass easily for that, and we wanted to see whether certain apartment complexes would fit that. And by doing that, we in effect posed as shoppers for the deal. By the way, competitors will shop your project all day long. Some of them reveal themselves, most of them don't. And there are firms that can do it very well. Pipeline of development and construction, clearly we need to do that. And then finally, we'll get into what I call the key sources and data. Now all of this, once again, is part of the pro forma in a way that the doctor put up here. And we look at Class A, Class B, we look at their period of year, we look at the change in rates, and all that tells us more about it. So once again, this will all be online, if you will. So ultimately it leads us, yes, do you have a question?
This is more about REES versus CoStar. I never had that time to ask you, but do you prefer CoStar or REES? Which one do you use?
I use REES,
Okay.
but there's a different reason for it. So for the last 5 or 6 years, our business has been in multifamily and residential development. And REES is really strong in that area for their data. CoStar, by contrast, even though they just bought apartment.com, and you've seen, Brad Bellflower on the ads, you know who he is. And so their strength is office transactions. So that's why each one serves a very good purpose, if you will, on it. But by entering apartment.com, they're now aggregating data at CoStar that will allow them ultimately to compete with REES. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. So all of that information gives you the ability to figure out a concept plan and figure out what to do with recommendations. So let's take another little hiatus before we get into our multifamily. I have another video for you. It'll be the last one of the day, I promise. And we'll see what you get out of this. Volume. Put this right. By the way, do all of you know what ballet is? No, don't laugh. I had a class last year, and have any of you not even been to a ballet? Okay.
Oh, no, no.
Oh, you've not been, but you know what it is? Okay. Well, I had a class last year, and more than half of them actually did not know what ballet was and had never been there. Okay, so let's talk about what we just saw there. Let's have another exercise, our last little video game, if you will, of the afternoon. Who wants to tell me?
Or synchronize, become
Okay,
ages.
all right, that's an interesting word.
Imagination.
Pardon?
Imagination. The
Okay,
costumes,
sing.
the costumes there.
Let me just type that as you're doing. So it's interesting why you said that. We'll go through the list here. Yes, Diana.
Stars, broadcast.
Okay, all right, so we'll talk about that. Yes, Paul.
Creativity.
Creativity. You mean the other building a barn isn't creative?
This is a creative
Executing a triple
art.
play isn't creative? Okay, yes, Claudius.
Artistic.
Artistic. Okay, I guess that's kind of a synonym for creativity as well. Okay, artistic, and yes, Rebecca.
Elegant.
Elegant, okay, all right. And is real estate an elegant endeavor? Okay, it can be. Yes, Davey.
Sequenced as a process or procedure.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. Okay, we'll get to that. Yes, Jack.
There's a lot of diversity there.
Okay, all right, so that's interesting. Yes, hand back there again, Rebecca.
Choreography.
Sorry?
Choreography.
Choreography, yeah, there's choreography. And maybe there's choreography
These
in
are like this.
other things that we do too, yes.
This is my favorite one.
Different structure?
The structure to like what they're doing.
Okay, all right, okay, good. We're gonna get to what I'm trying to deal with in just a minute, okay, yes, Juan.
The representation of what the act is, the history or something like that.
Okay, we're getting a little closer. This is a little interesting. Okay, any other guesses?
Aesthetic.
Hmm?
Aesthetic.
Aesthetics, maybe that's maybe that's part of artistic and elegant. I'll put it down there because all real estate does some level of aesthetics, right? Okay, Rebecca, you've had your chance. Who hasn't raised their hand? You didn't for this one, yes.
They were having fun.
They're having fun? So you mean all those Amish men weren't having fun up on top of the barn? But it's interesting, and she can read minds, apparently. Okay, and
Well, ages, like different ages.
different ages, okay, I don't know about that.
Like
All right,
eats
I'm gonna try to fill up this column. Any more? Yes, Claudia.
Practice to perfection.
Oh, really? Okay. But, you know, there's something to be said for that. Any last comments? Yes, Brandon?
Fast pace?
Fast pace?
I felt like that was pretty fast. Constantly going. But the music is pretty fast paced to me. I haven't seen that many.
How many of you actually been to a Nutcracker, you know,
Oh, yeah,
performance?
to
You know,
my
that,
daughter.
you know whose music that was, by the way, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, good. We have some people who know a little bit about Russian music and stuff. Okay, great. All right, look, let's talk about some of these things that we put up here.
Is there a moral to this story?
Pardon?
Should we build around the theater of the performing arts? What's the moral of the story?
Well, you know, I don't know.
Stand on
Wait,
line at
wait,
TKTS.
wait. We have to be careful, and I like to believe that we live in a world that has. It's a moral world, and we get into a philosophical and theological discussion. But real estate of it in itself has no morality. I mean, it's a business transaction. It's what you bring to it that makes a huge difference, of course, and you imprint on the deal. But so it's interesting to me that let's see if we can categorize a lot of what we see here. So we have the artistic, creative, elegant stuff. We've got this sequence, choreography, and structure. That's kind of another category. Imagination supporting. Think about what it is, and you may have gotten close to there. Where was this performed?
Stage.
I'm sorry, on what?
Stage.
A stage. All right. So, what does that mean? There is an environment in which it's done. You know, nobody really said too much about the baseball field or the Amish field. I don't know exactly where that was in Ohio or Pennsylvania or wherever. But what many real estate people forget about is the environment and the context of which we're in. And go back and you think, well, yes, there were the costumes, it created a certain aesthetic. There was the scenery and the stage set. Oh, by the way, that's just as much a part of the deal, right? So now I'm going to translate it a little bit into the real estate, if you will. And so do not forget that you must focus not just on the foreground, but the background and all the supporting cast or characters as well. And so that goes back to this whole issue. Remember, all those disciplines in our real estate process, each one has a role to play. And so maybe this is just one way to help. I hope you see that example of the roles. And if you don't forget about it, just like when we did that Rockville, Maryland deal, we had to make sure we understood the cast of everyone and the environment. As I said, we couldn't just dig up the old monuments, if you will, and the stone. We had to be sensitive to it, but it created a context too for developing our deal. So hopefully that gives you an interesting aspect or perspective of what it is. So let's talk about this multifamily case study. This is a deal that I worked on 2 years ago. Actually it was about the fall of 2013. I was working with my colleagues at the Weissman Group in New York City, which I've done a lot of work for, and they said, we have a client who is our developer. They've won the opportunity to joint venture with the municipal transit authority. In Pittsburgh, it's called the Port Authority. And so they said, you know, we've got to figure out the terms of the deal because we need to negotiate what we're going to build. And we had a concept plan, and just like any other, or many other public agencies, they said, here's the RFP. Our client, the X company, and you can see the name if you Google it, said, we need your assistance. We want to make sure we negotiate the right deal. We understand the market, and we can build the right product for that. So, in doing that, what did we have to do? We were in effect given the task of figuring out what the property was all about. So we have to look at the property itself, and we'll go through that. We analyze the location, okay? Maybe it's straightforward, maybe it's not. We look at what I call the development pipeline. Remember that new construction, whether it's planned, under construction, or proposed? Each one of those is a different item, in fact. So in fact, let me just mention, there are those three categories. If it's under construction, it's probably real. May get finished, we know it's going to enter the inventory for your competition. Yes?
Well, I was at, how accurate is the information on the pipeline, or because it's such a critical part of the process?
Well, but that's, you're leading right into the trap that I just set for you. So if it's under construction, I think we can believe that probably will get done, right? And then the next part is it's planned. Well, is it approved? Has it passed building permit? Has it passed the zoning? And so that's a little less certain,
Sure.
to say the least. But remember, in the listing there, he had under construction, planned, and the third category, proposed. You know, I can propose something and it may never come to see the light of day. And there's a lot of that happens. So right now, if you look at the pipeline in Miami, or Broward, or Palm Beach counties, there's a big number there, but, you know, I don't think a healthy percentage of it would ever get built. Simply because they couldn't get the financing.
Proposals just as a deterrent.
Well, that's right. So, can you get the financing? I may have a great idea, but I can't get someone to invest in it. And so all those things have an impact on the pipeline. Yes?
What type of percentage would you apply to it being developed or coming through?
So that's a good question. So if it's under construction, I mean, if I had to do a formula, remember I guess this would be, wouldn't be a quadratic equation. I think we'll keep it simple. But it's really basically, remember quadratic equations?
Yes.
Sure. What was that, Carol?
Immediately the square root sign and divide.
Okay, that's good. All right, but we're going to make it really simple, actually. It's just simply going to be, I would say, and this is a guess, because every market's different. So if it's under construction, I'd say 90% chance. So, you know, we have 1,000 units, 90%, 900 of them will be delivered. And then if I'm looking at actually planned, I might say 50% of those, because we don't know. And you can break this into different categories if it actually has a building permit, or if it actually has the approval in the plan, or if it's zoned. and then we have proposed 10, 15, 20%, if we're even lucky. So that's the one way to just kind of out of the box, once again, just a rule of thumb, say, does it make sense? So when you see that, oh my goodness, 9,000 or 10,000 or however many units are in Dade County being proposed, you gotta take that with a grain of salt. In fact, what's really fascinating, of course, during the last bubble, 30 or 40,000 units were built. And everybody said, by the way, nobody would ever be able to build another unit of housing in Dade, in Miami-Dade, right? Well, we've got actually about 7,000 or 8,000 units under construction right now, and I don't know how many are planned. Does anybody want to hazard a guess? I'm a little bit off on a tangent. Why do you think that all those units got absorbed? I'm sorry, speak louder.
The price went down.
Immigrants coming
Yes, but, so, isn't it interesting? All that building and development did something. Let's just do a top of the, you know, if you were back of the envelope or the napkin analysis. So if I've got 40,000 unoccupied condominiums, what's going to happen to the pricing of them? They're going to go down.
Right.
All right, now if I can't sell it, and I've got a debt, I've got mortgage and rent, so what will I do instead?
Rent them.
You're going to rent them. Now, you're carrying the mortgage, you've got the HOA and the condo fees. You certainly would like to make a profit, but what's your most important goal? Well, you want to
Minimize loss.
Well, okay, you want to minimize your out-of-pocket expense. And so by doing that, what that did is it sent rental rates down. So here we have is 2008, 2009. All of you who are in the millennial or younger age cohort said, oh my goodness. So the economy starts to kick back up again. Companies say, oh my goodness, I can move my workforce to Miami. They can afford housing. And all of a sudden, in the seeds of this disaster are sown the opportunity for incredible growth. And so within 3 years, 40,000 units get absorbed. That's amazing. And what that has done is actually created an environment and an energy for development and activity, certainly in downtown, along Biscayne Corridor and others, that surpasses anything that Miami had a decade ago. So if you let philosophy, if you let the free market do its thing, all right, we build too much, we suffer, we'll lose the deal. I've lost a number of deals. And okay, we lose them, we lose money, but then the second owner or the third owner, usually by the third one, someone will make some money. And that creates a real opportunity and the market can build again. The question is, are we going to get to the next stage? Yes.
What's your forecast with that glut that we have now as to, are we gonna have another?
Are you sure
burst
there's a
of
glut?
Well, I'd say so. I live in the Brickell and there's lots of stuff going on around there.
There's lots of stuff going on. So when you do the analysis, maybe you should have him do that analysis for us, figuring out whether it makes sense to even build another apartment or condominium in that area. I don't have a specific forecast because while I know markets, the question is, what am I forecasting for? Am I forecasting because I want to build something there? Are you worried about a market overhang? So I'm not going to give you a direct answer on that point. Well, I have lots of ideas. I know exactly what I do, and that's kind of a little bit of, I guess we'll call it proprietary information that's in my brain. But the short and simple answer is, if you're already building and you're in the ground, you better finish, okay? But you're going to have to adjust your pricing. But if you're not, okay, then I think you might want to sell that property to the next unwitting.
Next cycle.
Well, maybe the next unwitting investor who doesn't know what's going on. All right, so housing market trends, and finally comparable property analysis. And so basically, what we did is we took a property, which we won in this RFP, 6.4 acre parcel, and one or two of you said you were going to Pittsburgh, and this is the property, giant parking lot. In fact, if we look a little bit beyond it, you'll see a big garage next to it. And its use is, well, crap, it's not really being used. This is adjacent to the light rail transit station in the South Hills of the city. And we said, okay, if that's the case, that's really good if we want to have a transportation opportunity or a walkable opportunity. And we call it a TOD, a transit-oriented development. That's the kind of properties that we happen to build and develop. So this was an opportunity, and so the request for proposal issued by the Port Authority said, oh my goodness, in fact you can see the edge of it right here, 2,000 car garage, never more than, I guess a third to a half filled on any particular day. So what do you do with all those extra spaces? What do you do with the extra land here? You see there's a giant parking lot here too. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So this was a really interesting opportunity. And so the joint venture was awarded to our client. And of course, the key here was to negotiate. They weren't selling the land, they were going to lease the land. The Port Authority was going to become a joint venture partner. Very similar, in fact, we right now are, hence we're going to do a lease and with a buy option for our deal in San Francisco. So it's one way for the government authority to hopefully earn something. And they came up with a plan. This is just a simple sketch. 320 units and 4 buildings adjacent to this particular garage. And the beauty of this particular development and the cost was, for 300,000 square feet of apartments, was that the parking spaces are in effect already built right next door. So just think, parking spaces nowadays cost, I'm going to say, about $20,000 a space to build. And we can do a real quick calculation. 300 plus units, remember we're good at math, right? So 320 units times 20,000 bucks, right there is $6.4 million, give or take. On the deal, you can see, oh goodness, that's 15% of our total development cost that we don't have to build. Maybe we can just lease them from the Port Authority. So there was a real incentive to look at that and figure out if these numbers make a lot of sense. So what do? We start looking at